أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم الأمين وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين آمين يا رب العالمين. Dear respected viewers, thank you for joining in on this your show live from the holy city of Karbala, Back to the Basics, in which you are joining me, your host Yahya Seymour, in which we discuss some of our foundational key differences with others who happen to belong to worldviews other than the worldview of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Ahlul Bayt of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Throughout this series, we have intended to bring to you a methodology which is not only respectful of the self, in that it does not cause one to leave the boundaries of respected etiquette and courtesy that Islam mandates upon us, but also one which is conducive to our own time as human beings. Indeed, we don't have all the time in the world, and so to expect us to be able to engage to a decent level with everyone of every single different belief is of course an absurd request. At the same time, there are certainly foundational questions that need to be asked. We need to ask ourselves certain questions, and we need to ask those who ask us certain questions about their own particular worldview. Now, of course, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time and are not familiar with the concept of worldview, allow me to quickly state that it is an interconnected series of beliefs which particularly pertain to ourselves, to the concept of God, and to the universe around us, based upon a series of very big questions. The answers we would provide to those according to our worldview would also determine how we act on a day-to-day basis, if we are indeed loyal and truthful to our worldview and have indeed adopted it and internalized it. That's not to say every single person that claims to be a Muslim, of course, is a Muslim, and not even every person that claims to be a Salafi is a Salafi, and not every person that claims to be a Shia is a Shia, of course. So we are all trying our best to be as loyal to the worldviews as we can, but of course we are all influenced by other worldviews at times, and we don't understand quite how often culture plays a dominant role in influencing just how our set of beliefs would take a slightly different turn. Of course, over the past few nights, in returning to our topic, obviously, we have returned back to the subject of the worldview of those who believe in no God. And in fact, some of them would deny the very concept of God, but many of them would just say that, no, I haven't seen enough proof for the existence of God. And we've seen how this is a worldview in and of itself, how denial of the existence of God is, of course, denial of something much vaster, much greater, and much more heavy in its weight than the denial of other concepts. So what we would see is that denial of God particularly leads to a denial of many of the things that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis. For those of you that disagree with me, for those of you that find what I'm claiming now to be absurd, this is not my words, or at least these are not words which I'm uttering without the approval and stamp of approval of varying leading atheist proponents of the worldview of atheism. Rather, this is something which has been affirmed and confirmed by several leading proponents of the atheist worldview. Amongst them, Dr. Alex Rosenberg, whose book, The Atheist Guide to Reality, has become a particular favorite on this show. Of course, we've moved on through the set of Alex Rosenberg's beliefs about what the new physicalist, materialist worldview he adopts, the one that removes God from the picture, entails about humans and their engagement with the world. And of course, we've seen it's been pretty bleak thus far. There's a removal of the concept of thought. For those of you who wish to experience that, they may return back to the episodes which preceded the Christmas special. And more importantly, there is now the topic of morality, a very, very bleak topic. Now, one thing I do want to point out to any believers and indeed atheists out there who are watching this show, when we look at the objections which were presented to both the theistic worldview and indeed the particular religions by atheists, what we would tend to see is we would tend to see many of the objections against the concept of God are, of course, attempts at being rational, and many of the objections against religion and the concept of religion are, of course, pertaining to good and evil, and particularly the problem of suffering. But what I'm stating here is, when you have removed the concept of thought from the toolbox that the human being has in their lives, and now you state that there's no such thing as objectively good or evil, then what you're basically telling me is that in order to even attack religion and in order to attack God, you're going to borrow concepts that you don't even believe in the first place. So if you want to state that you have a problem with God on the basis of what you perceive to be unnecessary suffering, well, what's your objective standard? Because upon atheism, there is no such thing as good and bad. And if you want to attack the concept of God on a rational basis, again, what's your basis? Because if we follow through with the logical consequences of atheism, there is no such thing as a grounds for trusting your rationality. So we find that this leads to major issues. Of course, when it comes to the issue of morality, we quoted Jean-Paul Sartre yesterday, one of the major existentialists of the 20th century, who of course had stated that if we have truly spoken of removing God from the scene, then there is now no longer a transcendent standard. By transcendent, I mean that which goes above human beings, that which is no longer subjective. Subjective meaning that which we pick and choose. Objective would mean here something beyond the standards set by human beings. Jean-Paul Sartre states, if we remove God from the picture, then we must also talk of removing things such as objective morality, because once you remove God, there is no longer that heaven in which you can ground these concepts of transcendental truths. And this is something extremely important for us all to understand. Now, one of the key issues in understanding what is a massive problem with believing in objective morality whilst yet maintaining there is no God is, of course, the fact that you have to be able to ground that objective morality. Now, I've spoken about this from the very first episodes of this show, Back to the Basics, in what we called the schemata of worldviews. And we stated that one of the schematas is that a worldview must provide an explanatory scope or have explanatory power that can explain away our human experience. Now, what do I mean by human experience? And what do I mean by explanatory power? Human experience is the very thing that we on a day-to-day basis experience in our lives. And we would ask, what I'm experiencing, the worldview of person X or the worldview that I adopt, does it provide a good explanatory power for what I happen to believe? So if I happen to believe that there is no such thing as thought, there is no such thing as a morality, do I have a good explanatory basis for why human beings tend to believe that they think, and why we all on a day-to-day basis believe and live according to a moral code? Now, no matter how much someone tells you, I don't live according to a moral code, we'll see if that's true. We'll see if that's true when a loved one of theirs gets murdered, when a loved one of theirs gets forcibly taken in a more dire situation, perhaps for murder, or other likewise brutal situations. We would see that at such moments, such an individual will leave this realm of relativism and absolute absurdity and will enter into the real world alongside the rest of us, and will probably go to a police station and try to deal with these issues in a real and conducive manner. But nonetheless, within the realm of academia, they can claim in their ivory chairs to actually believe that no, there is no such thing as objective morality, it's all just subjective. But we've seen what the problems with subjective morality are. And we've seen what the problems with claiming objective morality within the framework of human beings would also be. So what we've seen is that if they wish to claim that objective morality would be based upon a greater good and the least amount of harm principle, Then imagine the following situation. Imagine a devastating terrorist attack ravages through numerous capitals of the Western world. And inshallah ta'ala, we pray that Allah Azza wa Jal saves and preserves all of the nations, no matter who they are populated by, from vicious terrorist attacks. For indeed our religion is free from this disgusting terrorism. But imagine a terrorist attack would spread throughout half of the world, claiming the lives of 1/10 of the population of every major capital city. It was all done and coordinated by one group. And yet, in the space of 2 years, no one was able to find who the group are responsible. Then you would have a large amount of people who would be physically distressed, mentally distressed in every way, shape, and form. You would have mass riots throughout the population, and this would cause a large amount of pain to the people living there. But on the other hand, the government is unable to control this, and so what they do is they have 2 or 3 innocent people, and they can do them over, or essentially claim that they are the culprits of this crime, knowing they are innocent, because their moral framework allows them to go with utilitarian principles in which the greater good is what is thought of, and the minimal amount of suffering is what is taken into account. Now, if you go with a minimal amount of suffering, then of course, this is one of the things that could happen. Another very, very brutal example, and I apologize, I will try to state this in a manner which is, inshallah ta'ala, befitting for the average family house, giving away my intended meaning without necessarily explicitly saying so. Imagine you were to have a large population of deformed, physically deformed men who suffered from a disease which affected them purely from a cosmetic standpoint. That is to say, it affects only their looks. But this disease is neither contagious, nor is it one that affects their lifespan or ability to do anything else. Unfortunately, these men are not capable of finding for themselves spouses or people to share their lives with them. This is a large population. These people are suffering as a result. But what you do have is you have several hospitals where there are numerous young and, dare I say, healthy-looking young women in comas. According to utilitarian principles, we would not see a particular problem with allowing these young men into such hospitals to facilitate their needs. Now, this could be done once a year, or it could be done twice a year, but this is one of the consequences of where do you draw the line when you try to create your own subjective human morality. This is the problem which those who claim we can do so without referring back to the transcendental would fall into. Dear respected viewers, these are just some of the examples. We're going to go to a quick break, inshallah ta'ala. Please join me afterwards. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear respected viewers, thank you for enduring with us patiently during that break. We were, of course, discussing the downfalls and the pitfalls of a theory of morality in the absence of a belief in God. Now, again, I do not wish to be misunderstood. There is a classic misunderstanding which occurs with anyone that engages in this topic. One of them is to appeal to popular belief, and another one is to essentially strawman or caricature the argument that the believer is putting forward. I am not arguing by any means, shape, or form that no non-believer can be moral. There are many non-believers, many atheists, who are far more moral than some of the people I know that claim to follow the world religions. there are some atheists who are far more moral than people I know who follow the same religion as myself. Am I struck or devastated at this fact? Am I incapable of providing an explanation for such? Absolutely not. We all have free will, and we all have an innate nature which tells us that which is good and that which is bad, to a large degree. There are foundational principles, of course. The innate nature will not uncover everything for us. But, nonetheless, I have no problem with non-believers who are able to be moral, because I believe we live in a world where clearly objective morality exists. And I would derive from this fact the fact that a God exists, the fact that Allah Azza wa Jal exists. You see, the problem with atheists is they don't always understand the argument. The argument is not that if you don't believe in God, you can't be moral. No. The argument is that if a God were not to exist, where would these moral values find their grounding? What would be the basis for these moral values? Who would have articulated, come up with, and revealed to us and inspired to us as human beings what these moral values are? In further elaboration, if I could give the analogy, again, this all draws back to the principle of providing an account for something or providing explanatory power and scope. Imagine I were to be debating with an individual that claims that there is no such thing as disease. And yet him and I would both walk into the hall and both of us would be suffering from the ailments of having a cold. That is the sickness of having a cold. Or a flu, for example. And during the debate, he would be arguing viciously with me that there is no such thing as disease, and according to his worldview, there is no such thing as a disease, and diseases do not exist. And I would say to him, but sir, clearly diseases do exist. I'm suffering from the flu and so are you. Or I'm suffering from the cold and likewise you are yourself as well. And he would state, yeah, so I might be suffering from a cold, but there's no such thing as disease. And I would say to him, but sir, a cold or the flu is a disease. So therefore, by your own argument, I'm demonstrating that you have no explanatory scope for the very phenomenon you're suffering from. And he would say to me, well, what do you mean? I don't believe in disease, but I've clearly got a cold, so colds exist. I really get frustrated at this point because I'd be explaining to someone that doesn't believe in diseases the fact that he has a disease. And he would say, well, you know, I have a cold, but colds exist and I don't believe in diseases. It goes into a circular process where this person is merely appealing to reality without providing any explanatory scope for it. It's essentially like the person that walks into a crime scene. He sees that there is a knife with blood on it. He sees that the knife has fingerprints on it. Next to the knife there is a glass which likewise has fingerprints on it, and it has the killer's saliva on the glass. I conclude from these facts that there was a killer in the room. The killer used a knife and the killer drank from the glass. And using these fingerprints and saliva, I deduce who the killer is. The atheist is like the person that walks into the room and says, I don't believe there was a killer here. And when I say, well, how'd you deal with this clearly available evidence? He says, well, what do you mean? They were just there. I don't need to provide an explanation for them because they're there. And when I point out the fingerprint, he says, yeah, it's a fingerprint, so what? I say, well, look, this fingerprint must clearly belong to someone. No, I don't need to provide an explanation for that fingerprint. What about the saliva? I don't need to provide an explanation for the saliva. It just happens to be there. This is the analogy of the atheist when it comes to the issue of objective morality. Now, what's interesting about this is there was once a very prominent atheist philosopher by the name of Joel Marx. Joel Marx, of course, is a professor of ethics and for a very long time had been writing in a journal by the name of, well, the journal's name was Philosophy Now, and his column was entitled Moral Moments, Moral moments, of course, refers back to what? Morality. And, well, the moment would be the time in which you read his article. But the whole point of this article was to articulate that he believed in a form of morality whilst negating a belief in the existence of God. And he held on to this belief very clearly. He wrote this column for a very long time. In fact, there is a book published with collections from this column. It's called Moral Moments, appropriately entitled after the column itself. But in recent years, in the past 5 years indeed, Joel Marks came out, and what did he state? He wrote a new article on a blog, and he called it an amoral manifesto. Now, of course, for those of you that are familiar with the term atheist, a meaning a negation of something, amoral means the negation of morality. And in his amoral manifesto, he came out and said what? He stated that after thinking and pondering over the issue for such a long time, I came to an epiphany, almost like a religious conversion experience. And I realized that the religious fundamentalists are right, he states. He states, if there is no God, then there is no morality. But then, instead of taking the right turn and saying, therefore there must be a God, because I've been defending morality for the past 10 years, Joel Marks takes a different turn and states, but I don't believe there is a God, and therefore I don't believe there's such a thing as morality. And so this is where we really go down the rabbit hole with Alice into Wonderland. And this is where we really do swallow the red pill and end up back into the matrix, because you can't trust anything. The very thing you were arguing for 10 years as a professor of morality and ethics, you now deny in order to blank out the radiant guidance of the existence of God. Of course, tomorrow, dear viewers, inshallah ta'ala, we will be going through the reasoning of Joel Marks for why he rejects the concept of morality and appealing to those, as well as looking at some defenses of those who claim that we can still have morality whilst rejecting the concept of God. Thank you so much for joining me once more. I pray that you're all doing well, and please do not forget us, particularly myself, from your supplications. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.